So we are here with David Runyon and are with Tommy Kenyon. David has a story about something to that and yes, go yourself, tell us about
I'd
yourself,
start right.
and
Can
then go into your story.
Zach? Can you refresh or jump out, refresh the browser, and come back in? See if that refreshes before you were talking before, and it was fine. And then we started, then it was bad again. So
All right,
try
yeah, let me see what I
refresh,
can do.
jump right back in. I'll
Tommy,
keep it. I'll
where are
keep it
you at?
recording. I'm in the DFW area now. I'm currently looking for a new job. I'm from the Spring area,
Okay.
actually in the same neighborhood as well. From there, we lived there in that neighborhood in the Breckenridge Forest area for a little bit. I moved out here. I went after I took a job out of college in 2010 in the Woodlands, and it is essentially the same job I've had. In that I moved out to Dallas. I recently just left, got laid off, and now I'm looking again.
Yeah. Should I take my glasses off? Because I know there's a lot of glare here.
Okay, she's back.
As long as you feel comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take them off for now.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Well,
I've
David,
known Zach from school and everything,
Gotcha.
same area.
yep,
All
yep,
right.
I've known a long time since we were in high school. Um, okay, this is me. We've got Tom is our guest today. So David, you guys tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what you're here for on the podcast, and then explain a little bit about your experience, and then go into why you were there.
Yeah. So my name's David Runyon. I just got out 2 months ago from serving a sentence in prison. I got 7 years. I spent 14 months of it there in county jail and state prison. Got paroled after that. So I'm still on paper, as they say, until January of 2029. And there was just a whole lot of injustice about the system, not just in prison, but before it too. I mean, there's so many wrong things. I mean, I shouldn't have been convicted in the first place. But beyond that, I mean, they treat you like subhuman cattle in prison and in county jail, and it's just terrible. And the amount of wrong things that happened, I mean, I could write a book on it, and I might. I might end up writing a book about it. But so I just wanted to talk about some of that stuff and bring it to people's attention, because if you only watch Law and Order, you get a really skewed sense of how the system works, or in my case, doesn't work.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your experience, a little bit about how this system works. I'm sure a lot of people are not familiar with that. You said you went to prison, correct? Not jail.
Yeah, yeah. I was in
Where is it?
county. Yep, yep. I was in county jail for 4 months from February of 2024 until June of 2024, and then I was in state prison for the next 10 months until April of 2025. And yeah, there's definitely a difference. For AC being one of the biggest differences, in county jail, at
What's
least
that?
in
AC?
yeah, at least in Montgomery County Jail, it's
What
all
is
air
AC?
conditioned. Air
Oh,
conditioning, yeah.
air conditioning. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. At least in Montgomery County Jail, and I believe most other county jails, it's all air conditioned. But in state prison, they're like, people don't need that in Texas. Who needs AC? We'll
Really?
just let them suffer. So,
Well, and it gets hot here, so there's just
oh
fans
yeah,
or something? Anything?
yeah, they do have fans if they work, and I mean it's not enough for the whole area, but I mean yeah, there's people dying of heat stroke every single year in Texas State Prison, um, you know, but nobody really cares because everybody views those people as the criminals. They're again subhuman cattle that don't deserve rights or fair treatment, So you ask a lot of Texas voters, and they'd say, "Ugh, those people don't deserve AC. They're rapists and murderers," which is actually a tiny percentage of the people that are actually there. I mean, the percentage of people in prison that are rapists and murderers is probably, 10%, probably 10%. And then the other 90% are, every other lesser crime. So like myself.
Geez. So 1 out of 10 people are rapists and murderers. How'd you get along with that population? I mean, did you get into any altercations? How did that
Yeah.
work?
So my estimate was, and I spoke about this with some other people in prison, and they kind of agreed that about 80 to 85% of the people in prison are not bad people. They are really not that bad. They're like, normal people that you could be friends with that either made a mistake or got, they got caught when somebody else didn't get caught, or they got wrongly convicted. But they're generally not bad people. They certainly don't need to be in there as long as they are. The other 15 to 20%, those are the bad dudes, the ones you stay away from, the ones that will start a fight over anything, the ones that are just actively anti-white racist or anti-black racist or just violent, terrible people that will, try and murder you or severely hurt you because you owe them money and you didn't pay them back.
So did you have any interactions like that?
I avoided all that, thankfully.
And you weren't one of those people.
I was not one of those people. No, I tried to.
Just to clarify.
Yeah. You want to avoid owing anybody money. That's for sure. One of my cellmates. This happened right after I left, when I was transferred from Amarillo to Abilene, and then a guy that was transferred after me, he told me, "Oh yeah, after you left, your cellmate got beat up to near death because he owed some people money," which I wasn't too surprised to hear because he owed me money too. I wasn't going to beat him up over it, but my cellmate P had owed some people money, so they got one of their gang buddies that was serving a longer sentence to sneak into the section and then just completely beat him up, gave him a bloody lip, knocked out several of his teeth, and gave him a black eye, just beat him up severely for owing this money and said, "Hey, you better pay up. And if you tell any of the guards about this, we'll kill you." So,
Jeez. So now I've got a lot of questions about that. So why would you let somebody borrow money for first, I guess?
So just trying to be, nice and trying to make friends, or you trust them and wrongly trust them, perhaps in a lot of cases. But and in my case, he kept begging, is like, "Oh, I need this and need this, and my sister will send me the money just later today, but I don't want to miss out on our commissary trip because if she sends it later today, it'll be too late to go buy it from commissary and I'll have to wait another several weeks to get this stuff. So can you just, And I was like, okay, all right, I'll help him out. So I bought like $45 worth of stuff, and I was planning on just, okay, once you pay me the money, then you can have the stuff. But he just took it right away, and then he also got moved to another cell, and then he immediately traded it away all for drugs. So I was like, okay, that's not cool. But I wasn't going to beat him up over it, but it wasn't very cool of him. And I'm not going to beat somebody up over $45, but.
And if you beat him up, does it clear the debt?
Depends. Depends on how you feel about it, I guess. I don't know what happened in his situation. I've never heard of it clearing a debt. So probably you
just
still
incentive to pay.
Incentive to pay, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, there was I heard when I was at the holiday unit in Huntsville, there were several inmates that died, which caused the whole unit to get put on lockdown. Several inmates that were murdered by other inmates. And I heard one of them was over a $6 debt. One guy owed a guy $6, and because he didn't pay it back, the other guy stabbed him in the eye.
I believe it's the
weapon.
They say the slave is or the borrower is slave to the lender. That I feel like comes into play here. So don't borrow money, people. That seems like a good advice in any circumstance. But here, there's dire consequences to it, huh?
Yeah, it was not great. It's just when you think about it, it's like, who can imagine killing someone over a $6 debt? It's crazy. I mean, the amount of the stuff that, because people just have no impulse control. Again, it's those small percentage of bad dudes. You don't want to mess with them. If it was one of the normal dudes, you'd be okay. If you're not going to get murdered over, lending this guy money and not paying him back. He's just going to, probably badmouth you to his friends like anybody on the outside would do. But he's not going to murder you over it. But you mess with one of those gang members or one of those bad guys, then you could get seriously hurt, for owing him money.
They probably have nothing to lose, so they're
or they get one of their
nothing
guys who has nothing to lose. Like I mentioned in the case with my cellmate P, he got his gang buddy from a neighboring building to sneak in and beat him up because that dude was already serving a long sentence, maybe a life sentence, so he had nothing to lose. When
That's
they're already
crazy.
Yeah, that's why they actually make an effort to separate the people with long sentences, like life sentences. They make an effort to separate them from the other inmates in general, because that can lead to a lot of violence when you have the people that have nothing to lose, like you mentioned. They're like, shoot, I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen to me if I murder another inmate? I get another life sentence. I've already got life, So, I mean, it's really problematic. I heard about a case. This was prior to my time, but I heard about it. It was a guy with he had a couple months left on his sentence, and his cellmate was a super long sentence. And the incentives there, when you only have a couple months left, you're trying to stay out of trouble. You don't want to get in any trouble because your parole could get revoked. You're about to get out. But if you get in a fight, you get something like that, your parole could get revoked. So you're really trying to stay out of trouble, compared to the guy that has life without parole or something. He has nothing to lose. And so he can steal stuff from the other guy. He can beat the other guy up. He can threaten the guy, extort the guy, and the guy can't do much back because he's really trying to stay out of trouble. And so what happened in that situation was the guy with the longer sentence ended up killing his cellmate, I think. And that's why they, in general, try and avoid that, but they definitely don't do a perfect job of it. They try and get people that are similarly sized, similar age, similar sentences to be cellmates together to try and avoid that type of thing.
And you said you've avoided all of this stuff.
Yeah, I did not get in any fights when I was in the 14 months. So it's not like everybody gets in fights. I mean, it is avoidable. If I had a life sentence, I'd probably get in a fight sooner or later if I had a life sentence. Being only 14 months in there, I was able to avoid it. And, for the most part, try and get along with guys, not starting fights, not borrowing stuff from people, not owing stuff to people. Try and avoid conflict where possible. Like, I remember at the Abilene unit, I was sitting at a table, and this is when I was about to get out with only a couple weeks left. And I was just sitting at a table watching TV, and a black guy comes over and says, "Hey, you can't sit here. This is the black only table. So, you got to move." And I'm like rolling my eyes, and I'm like, okay, I could start some fight about this because this is stupid. Whatever. This is totally stupid that he's saying this is the black only table, but it's not worth it. So, I'll look weak by just, acceding to his demands and just moving elsewhere. I'll look weak and lose face. And that's why fights start, because they're not willing to. They're like, no, you want me to move? Make me move. I ain't doing what you say.
Yes.
So that's how fights start. But because they don't want to look weak. But I'm like, okay, I have two options. I can move and look weak, or I can, stay and fight. I'm not going to risk my parole over that, especially when I'm so close to going home. So I'm like, you know what? Fine. I'll just get up and move.
Smart.
Whatever. And then,
Hey, Tommy. Oh, just real quick. I'm so sorry. Hey, Tommy, will you take over for a second? I'm going to go grab me a Monster, get some energy. Awesome. You go ahead and take
All right,
me
I'm
off.
here.
yeah. And then so after that happened, that same black guy for the next 20 minutes was just insulting me loudly and stuff. Like, oh, how this white guy thinks he can sit at our table and blah, blah, blah. And he's probably gay anyways. And I'm just rolling my eyes okay, I'm just going to ignore all this. It's not worth it. I mean, I don't really care what this guy has to say, and it's not worth it to start a war of words back and forth. But I'm just trying to mind my business and get out of here. But especially with people that have longer sentences, they're worried about losing face, and so they will fight back or throw words back, which will get escalated and lead to violence a lot of times. But I only saw a couple fights directly in my time there, and I did not see any super serious injuries happen, but I definitely heard about it happening. And there were definitely several inmates that got murdered in other parts of the prison that I did not witness firsthand. That happened with regularity. There's a lot of inmates that die every year due to getting murdered by other inmates, or just poor medical care, or heat stroke. Most of the Texas prisons do not have AC. They say they are working on getting AC for all the prisons. So maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, we'll see all the Texas state prisons have air conditioning, but they currently don't. So at the Holiday Unit, for example, in Huntsville, the first prison I went to, about 30%, I think, of the inmates have air conditioning currently. And that's happened in the past couple of years. Before that, there was no AC. So about 30% of the inmates have AC, and apparently they're working on expanding it. But it was pretty miserable being there from June until August with no air conditioning. It was terrible. I mean, you're just sitting there sweating the whole day. It was pretty awful.
Look, he's back now. I was going off camera to save his bandwidth and everything. I'm chatting in the background, so I know there's connection issues, but we can continue here. But one thing that was, as I was listening, like off stage, off when I was off camera before, and it was going through my mind, and it's not like the same situation I know, but like one thing I experienced, the one thing when you said why you would want to, like when you make people happy, when you would not roommates but cellmates, when you wanted to make people happy, like I know he asked one question, like what did you ask, was it borrow money or something, or owe money? And I was in one situation, again, not like remotely as bad, but like I was traveling and I was staying at like this house that I was visiting. I was driving in my car and everything, and he asked all of a sudden like to loan me $500 or something. I did. I got the money back too, but like I was like, should I? Do I want to do this? Like, but like I'm staying at his house and it's all for free and everything, and it's like a temporary thing, and it was. And he asked me again, and I didn't. Oh, again, but that just came up in my mind, or it made me think of that, and it's like, why you do that? Like, yeah, like you said, like to make people happy, to get people happy with you and in good mood or something.
Yeah. Prison is a pretty miserable place. The more friends you can make, the better. And I was able to make some friends while I was there, because like I mentioned, most of the people in there are decent people. They're not that much different than you and me. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree from Texas A&M. So most of the people there were not educated like me. I think I met one other person who had a master's degree. There was, very few that had a college degree. A lot of them didn't even complete high school. But aside from education, they're not that much different. They're not horrible, evil, violent people. There are a minority that are that way. There are, you can't get rid of prisons entirely. 15 to 20% of those people are bad dudes, and they will keep committing crimes if they get out. You can't get rid of them entirely. But most of those people did not need to be there. And the other prisoners I talked to in general felt the same way. They felt like, yeah, a lot of the people in here do not need to be here. There are some that are bad dudes that do need to be here, but most of the people here in prison do not need to be there. It's just a waste of money, and it just causes their life to be immensely worse, and for actual no gain. There's actual no gain. Studies have shown that putting people in prison actually just causes more crime. It makes them more likely to be criminals once they get out. You give a guy a 2-year probation versus a 2-year prison sentence. If you give him that prison sentence, you are actually increasing the amount of crimes he will commit in the future. So it's actually totally counterproductive. Let's say on average, if you give him 2 years of probation, he'll on average commit 1 crime the rest of his life, just to make up a number. Well, if you give him a 2-year prison sentence instead, then he'll commit on average 2 crimes the rest of his life. When I say commit, I'm meaning convicted of. So you've actually just made him more of a criminal because you've destroyed his entire life. And now he probably lost his house, lost his wife, lost his friends. And now the only friends he has left are his fellow convicts that he met in prison. So you can see how you easily fall back into criminal ways when you get out, when people won't talk to you anymore, as I've found. And, so it's totally counterproductive, and it doesn't need to be done for the majority of people in there. It's just totally excessive and super expensive. I mean, depending on the state, you're spending $30,000 to $40,000 per inmate per year to be incarcerated. I mean, it's just, and it's not like we get a good quality of life out of that either. We get a terrible quality of life. That's, I mean, it's probably better than somebody sitting in prison in El Salvador. But compared to other rich countries, our prisons are a lot worse. If you compare us to Western European countries, or Norwegian prisons or that sort of thing, we imprison a lot more people, and the conditions are much worse when we do it. So, the U.S. actually, here's an interesting stat: the U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but 15% of the world's prisoners. It was 20%. It's dropped a little bit over the last decade, but the U.S. did have 20% of the world's prisoners, despite 5% of the world's population. The U.S. imprisons more people than any country in the history of the world. So, and most of those people, I think like half the people are in there for victimless, nonviolent crimes. So it's absolutely insane. You assume that everybody in prison is rapists and murderers, and that's just absolutely not the case. Probably like 10%, even the sex offenders, they assume, every sex offender is a child molester. No, it's probably like 15% of the sex offenders are child molesters, because you can get there for a bunch of other crimes too.
Where I don't know exactly where he wanted to go next with this, but
so I can just talk about what got me there in the first place. So so the whole system was just wrong and messed up. Not just the prison system. The prison system was bad, but everything before that was terrible too. I mean, the judges, the legal system, the police. I mean, it never should have gone where it did. It's, I was, in my opinion, wrongfully convicted, and a completely excessive sentence of 7 years, and had my life destroyed over this, and it's just not right. So it all started back in 2020. So it was the summer of 2020. COVID was happening. I was dating my girlfriend at the time, Karen, who Zach has met. So I've been dating her since 2018, and then it went to 2020, and COVID had put some stress on our relationship. I bought a house for us. We were living in Spring since May of 2019, and we planned on making a South Korea trip. She's Korean and had never been back to her country of birth since she was 6 months old. And so we wanted to go to South Korea, but that got canceled due to COVID. That put a lot of stress on the relationship. Things had started to get worse around July. And then one day, Karen got upset at me one night. And she threatened to move out. And then the next day, as I went to either work or the dentist, I forget which, she got on my computer when I was away, and looked on my computer and found what she thought was illegal pornography. So to give some background, I had struggled my whole life with addiction to pornography. So like a lot of people my age, it's easily accessible for free and easy to get addicted to. So I probably had downloaded about 600 gigabytes of porn on my computer, which is a very sizable amount. And I had only gone through probably 2/3 of it. I had not gone through the other 1/3. It had been downloaded, but I'd never looked at it yet because I didn't use pornography as much when I was in the relationship with Karen for 2 years. It was still there on my computer, but I didn't use it as much. So that one day she got on my computer because she thought I was cheating on her, which I was not, but I had flirted with other girls online, which I should not have done. Some call it micro cheating, and I shouldn't have done it. It was wrong. I had not physically cheated with anyone, but I had flirted with those other girls, and I shouldn't have done it. And she knew about it, and it caused her to lose trust. So she wanted to find evidence of me cheating. So in her words, she snooped around on my computer, and she found some files that she thought were child pornography. So it turns out there was probably about 9 files out of those 200,000. The government, after searching for 6 months, said they found 9 files out of 200,000 that were illegal. So 1/2 of 1/100th of 1%. So these are files that I almost certainly never looked at, never viewed, would have deleted if I knew they were there, but I had not gone through about 1/3, so about 200 gigabytes of the files. And so that's where I screwed up. Occasionally when I did find child pornography, I deleted it. You know, I was downloading files that I didn't always know what was in them. So I download a RAR compressed file of like, you know, maybe 300 megabytes of porn. And if it was, you know, some 10 or 12-year-old, I'm not interested in that. So I would delete it once I found it. But I hadn't gone through about 200 gigs of this. So that was where I went wrong. I should not have taken that risk and been downloading those raw compressed files. It was too risky. But the thrill of it, you know, the like, oh, this is kind of forbidden. And, you know, you're pushing the boundaries. And that gets exciting. But obviously it was a stupid decision. So because these 9 files that I never viewed and would have deleted if I knew they were there, my life got destroyed over those. Because she found, I guess, a couple of them and talked to her brother, who is a police officer in New York. And her brother said, yeah, you should go to the, go to the cops and go to the FBI about this. So she did. And they told her, hey, can you steal his computer basically and give it to us? And she said, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. So they said, okay, don't worry. We'll work on getting a search warrant. So just don't tell him anything. So for the next month, she basically pretended that everything was normal. Didn't say anything about it. Just, I guess, knew the cops were planning to get a search warrant and raid the place, but just pretended everything was normal. Yeah, so then a month later, they raid the place and take everything. And then from there, I find out that, oh, this was, where it all started, from, I guess, Karen getting on that day, which I hadn't known about until the cops came in August of 2020. And it took about 6 months for them to search through, because I think at first they couldn't find anything, because the vast majority of it, as I mentioned, 99.99% of it was legal, adult porn. But, they searched my computer for 6 months. And then after 6 months, in February of 2021, they finally charged me and said, okay, we found 9 files that we think are illegal. So we're going to destroy your life over that. 9 files out of 200,000. So they charged me with 2 of those files. They didn't charge me with the other 7. And I've probably never seen any of these 9 files, even to this day. But they said, yep, we're going to charge you with these files. And in Texas, the sentence for each count is 1 to 10 years. I mean, it's the charge that's easiest to stack up and stack a ton of them. If you murder one person, you can only get 1 count. But if you have 10 images on your computer, if they want to, they can charge you with all 10 of them and say, we're going to ask the jury to give you a sentence of 100 years, the max on each of them, 100 years, for having 10 pictures on your computer. It's just the penalty is vastly disproportionate and is actually, in federal cases, the penalty for possession of child pornography is the second longest of any crime, actually. The longest is murder, which is what you would expect. But the second longest is possession of child pornography, longer than the average sentence, longer than attempted murder, rape of a child, attempted rape, treason, name any other crime. The average sentence is actually less than having images on your computer because the penalties have just gone up, up, up. And they've increased by the average sentence has increased by about 500% in the past couple decades. And it's because there's a lot, as you can see if you just go on the internet, there's a lot of hysteria about it, They say, oh, anybody who had child pornography on their phone or computer, lock them up and throw away the key, and it's just heavily, a lot of judges have even commented on how the sentences are excessive and disproportionate. And a lot of judges have been surveyed and feel that it's excessive. And in my case, I arguably did not even commit the offense that I was charged with. So in Texas, I had thought up until January of this year, I thought it was strict liability. Then after that, I read the actual criminal code for possession of child pornography. And it states that a person commits an offense if you knowingly and intentionally possess or download, possess in some way child pornography. And I thought it was actually what's called a strict liability crime. I had thought if it's on your computer and, if it's your computer and it's there, boom, you're guilty, basically. Because that's how it usually works in every case. The prosecutors don't actually prove intent. The juries don't make them prove intent. They just say it was his computer and it was there. Therefore, we're assuming it was his stuff and he intended to have it there. They don't do anything to prove intent and the juries don't make them prove it. But in reality, it's not a strict liability crime. You do have to have that intent. And so in my case, I intentionally downloaded the .rar compressed files that I knew they had porn in them. I didn't know what porn it had in them. So if I had known, when I found out what was in it, I deleted it. So I would argue that shows that I did not have the intent there. So I would say I did not even commit the crime that I was convicted of.
Though wouldn't it be hard to prove that because you downloaded it, you can't prove that you didn't use it? Would that be the case?
Well, you can look at usage on the computer and stuff, like has this file been accessed and stuff. And I'm actually trying to get those files for my case right now because I'm still trying to fight to overturn my conviction. And that's one of the things I want to look at and see, hey, do they have evidence that shows these files were ever even viewed or accessed? And so I'm trying to get the files for my case. And it's much more difficult than it should be. My own lawyer cannot give me the files. I had to request them from the county. There's some law, the Michael Morton Act, which was supposed to reduce prosecutorial abuses, but actually has a provision in there that says, oh, by the way, defense lawyers cannot hand documents or evidence from the case to anyone. And I guess the interpretation is that includes their own clients. So my own defense lawyer. And
is that a public defender? Is that a public defender, or do you pay for him?
No, I paid for my lawyer, Tracy Pullen. She's a lawyer up in Conroe in Montgomery County. Yeah. She's a good lawyer. But she cannot give me the files under this Michael Morton Act, which is just crazy that a defense lawyer can't turn the files over to the defendant. She can show them to me, but I cannot possess them or be given them in any way. So it makes it hard to put on a defense, and even harder in these cases because I have never seen the files I was charged with. I've likely never watched them. I don't even know the contents of them. They really do not let you see much of the evidence, and because, oh, it's child pornography. It's, too dangerous, I guess. So you don't even get to see most of it. It's crazy, You think, oh, all the evidence has to get turned over to the defense, right? Well, it makes it hard to put on a defense when the defendant can't even see it. So it's a pretty terrible system.
It's kind of a weird area right there. Seeing the crime is the crime.
Yes, seeing the crime is the crime. So unless you're a cop, and then it's totally fine. But
can you imagine having that job, having to go through 200,000 files of porn, find really bad porn? That's
yeah.
Like
they spent
job.
6 months. They spent 6 months doing that, and so it took them
do you have a
6.
Question?
Sometimes
I don't know where the question was though. Like, knowing that you have never seen it, the images could I don't know how that would even be proven. Because you wouldn't be able to describe them in any way. I don't know.
Right.
I thought I had a
It sounds
question
like
there.
he's saying. So it sounds like he's saying that there's, like when you click on your IP address, you can go into a video and in the background video, it'll show, watch time or how many clicks or how many access. Something like that is what I'm guessing that is what the information that you're looking for.
That's right. That's what I'm trying to look for to see if those are somewhere in the police reports of, how many times were these files accessed? Were they ever accessed, or were they even extracted? They were probably extracted from the compressed file, but I probably did not look at what the files were that were in there. Like I download a compressed file that has 30 or 100 videos in it. And then I never looked at those videos, I just downloaded and extracted it, but never got around to looking at it. And so the question is,
we're about
is that even
40
illegal?
minutes in? So we're about 40 minutes in. What are you looking for to, as far as like the process and, what you experienced?
So first of all, I want to overturn my conviction because it was based on a lot of wrong things. Number one, arguably, I'm sure a prosecutor would disagree. But if you look at the wording of the law, arguably under how I read it, because it's not strict liability, I did not knowingly and intentionally possess these files. Yes, I downloaded the RAR file that contained them, but I did not know exactly what was in them. And when I did find the child pornography, I deleted it. So, like I said, 99.99% of what I had was legal adult pornography.
And you don't have to prove your innocence; they have to prove your guilt. Is that correct?
Theoretically,
right.
In practice, that's not how it works. Unfortunately, that's how it should work.
Did you have a jury trial or a judge trial?
So I had neither. We would have probably had a bench trial. In Texas, you can request either. It did not go to trial, but
right.
And I'll explain why in a minute. But in Texas, interestingly, and about 5 other states, the jury decides the sentence. In most states, it's actually the judge that decides the sentence. The jury just decides the verdict. So. But in Texas, you can actually have it either way. You can request to either have the jury assess the sentence or the judge. But in these types of cases, they usually inflame the jury and it'll say like, hey, look at these kids that were injured and, and hurt. And we're not saying this guy did it, but he's here and you can punish him. So, and I've seen the sentences really go up over the last couple decades. So, you probably want a judge to issue the sentence, if anything, but it didn't go to that. What we actually did was we tried to have a suppression hearing. So, my lawyer said, hey, you don't want to go to trial on this because, again, they'll say, hey, it was on his computer. It was his computer and it was on there. Therefore, he's guilty. The juries don't make him prove intent. Right. So, they basically crucify the people for this. So we said, okay, we don't want to go to trial. So what we should do is do a suppression hearing, which was a point that I found in the law, which was that Karen actually broke the law when she got on my computer because she broke what's known in Texas as the breach of computer security law, where I believe the wording of it, if more or less exactly is a person commits an offense if, without the effective consent of the owner, they access a network or computer. And that's a breach of the law. And that's clearly what Karen did. She got on my password-protected computer without my consent, without my permission. She had never done it before. I had never given her any of my passwords. But that one day, I may have left it unlocked. And another time, she got on a couple days later, I think, to confirm it, and she admitted guessing my password. So she definitely got on there without permission. She called it snooping in her own words. She felt guilty about it. She even admitted at the suppression hearing, which was in February of 2022. It took the whole process takes way longer than it should have. Like I said, this, to give an idea of the timeline. So August of 2020 is when the cops raided the place. I think it was August 18th of 2020. They didn't charge me until February of 2021. So I'm just sitting in limbo for that long, already got let go from my job, but
at home.
At home. Yep. At home. Yep. And that's right. And then in February of 2021, they finally charged me. So I'm out on bond for the next several years. And, thousands of dollars I had to pay in bond and lawyer fees and bond supervision costs I have to pay. I have to pay for a random drug test every month, even though my crime had nothing to do with drugs or alcohol. But everyone in Montgomery County, every felony bond defendant, they force to pay for random drug tests because they can, because it's good politics. It's totally ineffective and pointless and punitive, but that's what Montgomery County does. So.
And I do apologize. I'm so sorry, Tommy. Can you take over again? I remember.
Okay.
Yeah. They charged me in February of 2021. It wasn't until February of 2022 that we had the suppression hearing. Then once we lost that, we went to appeal. We got oral arguments for the appeal in May of 2023. They issued the opinion denying it and upholding the lower court decision in August of 2023. And then we appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which declined to hear the appeal in January of 2024, and then I got locked up in February of 2024. So this whole thing took 3.5 years between when the cops raided the house and when I finally went to prison. And it all could have been done in 2 months. And it used to, like 70 years ago, it used to get resolved in 1 or 2 months for the whole process. You get arrested, charged, trial, appeal, boom, done, executed, in a couple of months. But ever since 1950 and 1960s, we've raised the mass incarceration level to such a point that courts can't handle the number of cases that we have now. We prosecute so many more people than we used to that the courts can't possibly handle it. And so because of that, everything takes so much longer. Like I said, something that would have taken a process that would have taken 2 months now takes 3.5 years for me and takes longer in a lot of other people's cases. Ken Paxton, our attorney general, they started investigating him in like 2015. And I think it only finally got dismissed or declined to prosecute further like a year or two ago. It took like 8 years or something to finish up his investigation. It's just crazy, that can be ongoing for so long. So going back to the suppression hearing in February of 2022. So our argument was that Karen broke the breach of computer security law when she got on my computer without my permission, which started the whole thing. And under Texas's exclusionary rule, which is fairly strong, if the whole thing was started by Karen's illegal breach of computer security, then any evidence stemming from that needs to get thrown out. So all the evidence would have needed to get thrown out. So if the judge had agreed that Karen broke the law, that would have thrown out everything and all charges would have been dropped and my life could have gone back to normal. Unfortunately, despite the fact that Karen admitted in the hearing that she did not have consent, I can quote the exact quote that my lawyer asked her when Karen was up on the stand. My lawyer said, "So you did not have David's permission when you got on his computer that morning?" And Karen responded, "Correct." So that's literally she admitted to breaking the law right there. She admitted she did not have my permission. Unfortunately, the judge can just ignore that and rule however she wants to. And that's how it goes. There's a saying that people say sometimes, the law is just vibes, meaning that judges can really rule however they want to. They can completely ignore the law and rule however they want to, however they feel the vibes go. They can rule however they want to, and there's not much you can do about it, unfortunately. So the judge unfortunately ignored Karen's direct testimony and my direct testimony and said, well, they live together. Therefore, she had permission to get on the computer, which is nowhere in the law and completely counter to the practice. I mean, Karen never used my computer before. I never gave her any of my passwords. You know, it was...
I could see if you're married or something, that would be maybe different.
Yeah. The fact that we were living together definitely played into the judge's opinion. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. We were living together. We were not married or engaged. But I think you're definitely right that if we were married, that would have been an even stronger argument for the court to consider, that, oh, well, it's, joint property if you're married or whatever. So it certainly would have been an even more uphill battle if we were married. You're right. But we thought we had a good shot, a good argument. Even the prosecutors acknowledged we had a good argument. But the problem is in Montgomery County, they will never offer probation for possession of child pornography. It's a policy. And why is it a policy of the district attorney? So they can run on it for re-election, so they can brag about it. So they can brag, oh, we never offer probation to these people, so we'll always send them to jail. So, they've offered probation for people, sexually assaulting minors and stuff like that, sexually abusing your stepdaughter. You can get probation for that. But possessing child pornography, nah, they won't give probation for that. If I was in Harris County, probably could have gotten probation. They say, I talked to a lawyer back when all this happened, August of 2020. He told me that Montgomery County was probably the worst county in Texas and one of the worst in the whole country for getting charged with this type of crime because of how harsh they are. Collin County up by Dallas is also notably very harsh. He said Montgomery County might be the worst, except for maybe Collin County, but they're both very harsh on these crimes. And why? So they can brag about it for re-election. It's all politics. The district attorney here in Montgomery County, Brett Ligon, is an absolute monster. He is just an awful human being. He gives out gold coins to celebrate when one of his underlings gets a life sentence for one of his for any criminal they're charging. So while district attorneys, it's in the Texas Constitution that the district attorneys are just supposed to be out serving justice, not seeking convictions. It's actually written down. They're not supposed to seek convictions. They're supposed to seek justice. And yet they basically celebrate and, give incentives to people. Oh, you got a life sentence rather than only 40 years? Here you go. Here's a bonus, a little gold coin to celebrate that you locked this guy up for so long. Great job. It's just terrible and completely opposite to the idea of serving justice. And he's just, there's so many things like that. He's been written about by the Washington Post, by some retired judges have written about what a terrible monster this district attorney is. And it's not widely known because really the local papers and the Houston Chronicle need to do a better job of covering it. And that's one of the things I'm going to try and get them to do, because it needs to be more widely covered by the local papers and the Texas institutions like the Texas Tribune and so on. Really need to do a better job of covering what a monster this guy is. And it's just all politics for him because it makes for good electoral politics and makes it easy to get reelected. And that's one of the problems with letting district attorneys be reelected, being a politically elected position. When you have them run in political elections, guess what? They act like politicians. So having our district attorneys and our judges be elected is actually terrible. It is horrible. A lot of the other rich countries don't do that. And they have better systems because of it. Their judges aren't always worried about the next election. The district attorneys aren't worried about what's going to win them re-election. So it's really, really one of the worst factors leading to our system of mass incarceration is because we elect our district attorneys and our judges. And in Texas especially, we're really big on that. And it's just not good. It's a really bad system and leads to a lot of terrible outcomes like mine. So in my case, if my judge had been appointed rather than elected, I think there's a good chance she would have ruled according to the law and ruled correctly and said, no, I mean, Karen did violate the law by getting on your computer without your permission, as she admitted, so we're going to throw it all out. But she was probably worried about upsetting the district attorney. She would have upset the district attorney and the prosecutors if she had done that. It's possible if it had gotten media coverage, it could have been bad for a re-election because, oh no, you let this guy possessing child pornography off, that, it looks bad. If the district attorney decided to publicize that, she could lose her next re-election. And I'm sure that was in the back of her mind. So that was Judge Patty McGinnis here, and overall, I thought she didn't do a terrible job with her decisions. And she wasn't as horrible as, she's better than the other Montgomery County criminal judges. Some of them, the other ones are even worse. Judge Grant jacked up the bond in my case, even beyond what the prosecutors asked for. Prosecutors asked to be set at like $3,500, I think, and he jacked up to $5,000. For no reason beyond that he likes punishing people. That's the type of guy he is. Prosecutors, usually defense attorneys will ask for it to be lower, prosecutors will ask for it to be higher, and the judge will choose something in between it. He jacked it up even beyond what the prosecutors asked for just because he could, because that's the type of guy that Judge Grant is in Montgomery County. So he's even worse. But, I do think Judge McGinnis made a bad decision in this case. And unfortunately, when we appealed it, they give a lot of deference to the lower court opinion. So basically, the court opinion, which you can find online for the Texas Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe, maybe it was the Ninth Circuit, the state appellate court, they basically said, well, there's a lot of conflicting evidence as to whether Karen had consent or not. She said some of the time she said she didn't know if she had consent. There's other times she admitted she didn't have consent. So who can really tell what the truth is, So we're just going to go with whatever the lower court said, which again, was a bad decision. And, my lawyer and myself both felt, again, we had a good shot because the law was on our side. The facts were on our side. Karen admitted she didn't have consent. But again, the judges can rule however they want to, and you just get screwed. So when they just ignore the law and ignore the fact that Karen admitted she didn't have consent, which is called an admission against interest. Karen admitted that she broke the law. And so, yeah, these other times she said she didn't know if she had she didn't know if she was breaking the law when she got on my computer. She didn't know if she lacked my consent. But, so they weighted that equally, and they shouldn't have. It was just a bad decision. And so, but unfortunately, a lot of people feel like, oh, if the court said it, the courts must be right. And so a lot of people just write me off and just, say, oh, he's a terrible person. He's a criminal. I don't want anything to do with him anymore because the court said so. And that's just not the way it is. People get wrongfully convicted all the time. The Innocence Project has said that of the people they've proven innocent through DNA testing, I think about 15% of the people they've proven innocent pled guilty. So these are people that knew they were innocent, were factually innocent, did not commit the crimes, and yet 15% of them still pled guilty because there's so much coercion in the process, because plea bargaining is such a horrific system. The U.S. Supreme Court has said plea bargaining is only okay if there's no coercion. And they know there's coercion every single plea bargain, but they just ignore it because it's the only way you can get the system of mass incarceration. We can't handle trials for everybody, for the amount of people. If you look back at the founding of the country, everybody got a jury trial. Nowadays, only about 2% of people get a jury trial. The rest of the cases are plea bargains. Why? Because prosecutors have so much coercive leverage. They can say, hey, if you accept our 2-year offer, we'll give you 2 years. But if you go to trial and lose, we'll give you life in prison. So take your pick. We'll ask the jury to give you life in prison. So, if you want to take that gamble, go for it. Or they'll say, hey, if you don't plead guilty, we'll indict you for these other crimes too. We'll, instead of being charged on 2 charges, we'll charge you on 6 or 7 of them. Or, hey, if you don't plead guilty, we'll charge your son with this crime too. We'll say your son was helping you out. Still be responsible for sending your son to prison. So think about that. Decide if you want to accept our guilty, because the prosecutors just want to get that easy W and not risk a loss. So They just want to use whatever coercive leverage they have to get you to sign guilty on that piece of paper, which is what I did. Because once we lost that suppression hearing, my lawyer said, no, we don't want to go to trial because they inflamed the jury on this. So our best option is that suppression hearing. If we had tried to go to trial, they probably would have pushed for 20 years or more. So instead, I got 7, which itself is just horrifically excessive. There was a news story about Jalen Kitna, the son of former NFL quarterback John Kitna. He was on the football team at the University of Florida. What he did was more serious than what I did. He was accused of sending child pornography over Discord, the online platform for chatting and sharing stuff. So he was accused of that, and they also found that he had child pornography images on his phone. He was able to get that pled down, possibly due to having a rich father, and also because it was just a different jurisdiction than mine. He was in Florida. He probably had a more reasonable district attorney, and having a rich millionaire father probably helps too. He was able to get it pled down to some misdemeanor obscenity charge, I think, and get 6 months probation. So he got no prison time for doing something more serious than what I did. And you can see that all over. It's totally dependent on where you get charged. Some people have gotten 300 years for possession of child pornography with no criminal history because they dared to go to trial. And the prosecutor said, okay, we'll charge you with, 300 counts of it or whatever, And even if the jury gives you the minimum of 1 year on each of them, if they say, yeah, he's guilty of 300 charges, then the least sentence they could give you is 300 years, So that's happened in some cases because the prosecutors wanted to punish this guy for exercising his constitutional right to go to trial. And that's what happened in my case. The prosecution said, if you just plead guilty and don't do the suppression hearing, we'll give you 2 years. That was the lowest they would go. They would not offer, as I mentioned before, they would not offer any sentence without prison time. So they said, you can do 2 years, but if you make us do this suppression hearing, which will take 4 to 5 hours of our time. So if we're taking 4 to 5 hours of our time, if you lose, you got to do 7. So, and the unspoken threat was that if we decided to go to trial and lost, they would push for 20 or possibly more. They could have charged me with other, charges too, So, but I thought it was going to be at least 20 if we went to trial. So when I lost the suppression hearing, I had to sign guilty for 7, even though I did not agree that I was guilty and feel that I'm wrongly convicted. I mean, they shouldn't have even, the judge ruled wrongly in suppression hearing, but even if she didn't, I mean, it's, again, arguable as to whether I even committed the crime in the first place. So just a horrible, terrible system, and I've been stuck fighting it ever since. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, the appellate courts give a lot of deference to the lower court opinion, and so it's very hard to get it overturned, unfortunately. And so
those 300 counts you'd mentioned, that was there actually anything to be the counts that they give 1 year each for? Yeah,
I don't remember the exact details. That was a case in Arizona. I know Reason.com has covered a couple of these cases where, guys with no criminal history will get charged. And because it's, like I mentioned, it's so easy to stack these charges. If you only murder one person, you can only get hurt with one charge, with one count of murder. They can't go higher than that. So whatever the statutory range for murder is, you'll only get that one. But child pornography, possession of child pornography is probably the easiest crime on the books to stack the charges for, because each picture or video is a unique count. In fact, each video can even be charged as something like 45 counts or something like that, if they want to. So, because it really hasn't kept up with the times and the technology. There's a enhancement for using a computer in the commission of the crime, which is how they all are, it's true for every crime. So it's not much of an enhancement if it's true for every single crime, And
apparently you don't even have to be aware of, if it's on the computer, you can still be charged.
Right. And again, in the law, you do have to be aware of it. You do have to knowingly and intentionally possess it.
And they can just ignore it then.
They just ignore it. I mean, if the jury doesn't make them prove it, then that requirement effectively doesn't exist. And because the prosecution, I mean, anyone knows how people view this type of crime. You know, anybody accused of it, they say, oh, that guy must be a horrible monster. We never want to talk to him again. You know, I never hurt any kids. I've never abused any kids. I've never done anything inappropriate with kids. Nobody's ever accused me of any of that. Even Karen, my ex-girlfriend, said that when she saw how I was playing like jigsaw puzzles with her nieces, she said it just made me love you even more because, you know, I was not, there was nothing inappropriate about it. I mean, you know, no one's ever accused me of anything, any inappropriate behavior with kids. In fact, just the opposite. But it doesn't matter to people. Once you get accused of this, you're crucified, you're a pariah. And so it's just terrible. And like I said, it's terrible they don't even have to prove this knowingly requirement. You look at so many court cases and really they never offer any proof of that. It's just, oh, it was his computer and they were on there. So boom, you know, that's it. It's hard to prove intent, so we're just not even going to try. And the juries don't make them prove it. So.
And Taryn, how's your relationship with Karen now? I know it's been a little rocky. We talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
How have you guys?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So I talked with her a few times after this happened. So it's actually interesting because, again, like I mentioned, she went to the cops at the advice of her cop brother and didn't say anything about it for a month, which is pretty underhanded to me. But after the cops showed up on, you know, August 18th or whatever, you know, it's not like she hit the road right then. She still stayed there and was like comforting me afterwards. We went to Chewy's. That I was in tears and totally distraught the whole time. You know, that whole day was like one of the worst days of my life. But she, after the cops raided the place at like 4 a.m, you know, with tons of guns drawn, tons of cops. I mean, they made it a whole big thing because they have nothing better to do. You know, in Montgomery County, there's not that much serious crime. And so they really spend a ton of their resources on this sort of stuff, on sting operations, you know, posing as minors to try and get people in sting operations for online solicitation of a minor, or these types of child pornography possessions, because there's not that much real crime. So they do this to try and easy way to win votes to get reelection.
So now you say this as, my question is do you think that there should be money spent to, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but to protect the kids?
I think they should do things that actually protect kids. They should maybe actually go after the people who actually hurt kids. You know, that I know it's a crazy idea, right? Like, how about actually go after the people who actually hurt kids? You know, I mean, crazy idea. I know, right? But instead of going after the people who haven't hurt any kids, maybe I go after the ones who actually have. I mean, it's just throwing that out there, you know, throwing that out there. There's so many.
So when drug dealers get caught, especially lower level drug dealers, you usually get them so that they can try to get the bigger fish. Do you think maybe that was a part?
I even offered, you know, like, hey, I mean, I can point you to some of the websites where this stuff happens, where I downloaded these files. You know, I can help you point that out to you. They weren't interested in any of that at all. They didn't care. They didn't care one bit about any of that. They just wanted to lock me up. They don't care about preventing any of this. They don't care about stopping it, doing any of that. They just care about getting their scalp so they can brag about it for re-election. You know.
And so is that? Do you think that's the benefit? Is they're just trying to get the case closed so it's just another notch under their belt?
That's all they want. They want the easy convictions, the free, easy convictions that they can brag about for re-election, that look good, that help them get. Because unfortunately, these lower level prosecutors, they get elected based on how many convictions they get. I mean, it's a terrible system, a terrible way to do it. You know, the more people they lock up, the more promoted they get. You know. So
I think I got two more areas that I'm going to hit. The one that I think will be on is the way that you've been treated and your friends kind of losing. And then, of course, I forgot the other place. So let's just go with that for now.
Yeah.
How has that been?
Yeah. So after it happened, you know, we were talking about Karen, and I did talk with her a few times after that. And I don't hate Karen. I don't even have any ill will towards her. You know, I still love her, and I don't know if she knows that, but I still love her as God loves all of us, and I want the best for her. And I think what she did was wrong and evil, but I don't hate her for it. And
how are you guys right now? I'm not sure if you.
I haven't spoken with her since about, I don't know, maybe a month after it happened, so maybe September of 2020. I haven't spoken with her since.
Really? Then. And you've tried, obviously.
Yeah.
Can you say that before you say that? Are you allowed to talk to her? I know in some cases.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am, yes. She's not a victim. You know, any victim of the case, I'm not allowed to talk to. However, you know, that's one of my parole conditions. However, there are no victims in this case. So there is no one I'm forbidden from talking to. You know, if someone had, for instance, raped a child and went to prison and got paroled on that, they would not be allowed to talk to that child while they're on parole. That's one of their that will be one of their parole conditions in almost every case. In every case, I'm sure. So, but for me, that's not applicable. So,
and how have your friends been treating you once they heard about this? Do they kind of give you a chance to explain?
You know, like you, for instance, Zach, you gave me a chance to explain. I really do appreciate that, because a lot of people have not. A lot of people heard about it and just would never talk to me again, never give me a chance to explain. And you did the more Christ-like thing and had an open mind and were willing to listen. And I really appreciate that, because a sizable percentage of people, especially the women, my female friends, have not. Yeah, some other friends have also don't want to talk to me anymore, and they just don't give me the chance to explain. The ones that I've been able to explain to, like yourself and a couple of my other ex-girlfriends, not Karen, but other ex-girlfriends, they've understood. So they've understood and given me, you know, heard me out and said, okay, yeah, I kind of understand how that could happen, even though, I mean, for men especially, because what led to this was pornography addiction. That was the number one cause, was pornography addiction. And men hear that and they're like, yeah, I get it. You know, men understand that. Women, I think, are less likely to understand that because it doesn't affect them as much. You know, women are less likely to be addicted to pornography, and they don't understand how it affects male brains differently. You know, it's more addictive to male brains, you know? And
yes, we are visually driven than women are.
Yeah. And I think that affects how people view it, you know? Like, they just think, oh, how could anyone ever do something like this? And I'm like, okay, I didn't even do it intentionally. When I found any illegal child pornography on my computer, I deleted it. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in 10-year-olds. I'm not interested in 12-year-olds. Some people are. Those are what we call pedophiles. I'm not interested in that. That's why I deleted it. You know, the average, here's an interesting stat.
Interesting distinction. You know, there's different names for years.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And people, sometimes I see people mention that on Twitter. You know, they're like, oh, well, if you're interested in a 15-year-old, it's actually technically not a pedophile. And everybody on Twitter is like, well, for you even saying that makes you a pedophile, you know? So people say that on Twitter.
Well, also that word is very strong. It's like conspiracy theory, right? Once you say that word pedophile, it's a very strong word that you brand somebody with that. It's no one can hear anything other than what you are. So
I mean,
strong.
The term groomer, you know, we see that thrown around a lot in recent years too. And in prison, every sex offender is called, you know, they call them chomos, short for child molester, even though the vast majority of sex offenders are not child molesters. They're in there for something else, like myself, in there for possession of child pornography or.
And I know that's a very serious thing in prison, and they don't take it lightly. And I guess to get back to kind of your experience, did you have to tell people that what your charge was, and how did they take that?
So I tried to hide it. I tried to hide it. I mostly did not. I tried to avoid talking about it for the most part. When I was in county jail, all of the sex offenders were together. So we were all in there for similar type of crimes, but most of the people didn't really want to talk about it because they really didn't want people to judge them more for, you know, what they were accused of, whether they were guilty or not. And so I really didn't talk about it too much until I started getting more comfortable with people. And then I'm like, you know what? They're in here for something similar to some other sex crimes. So they're not going to judge me too harshly for it. In fact, my crime, possession of child pornography, was the only sex offense that you were not required to spend 50% of your sentence before being eligible for parole. It's what's called a 3G offense, is the ones where they're more serious. And so you have to spend 50% of your sentence. They're aggravated. You have to spend 50% before you can get parole. So if I had a 7-year sentence, I have to spend 3.5 of it. But that's only for people charged after September of 2023. Because I was charged before then, that did not apply to me, even though my prison sentence took place after September of 2023. So it did not apply to me.
Because you spent a lot less time. How did that
That's
happen?
right.
I thought it was always the 50% rule or whatever.
No, it's
I've actually heard more that it comes up to a 75%.
So in federal cases, and in some other states like Tennessee, I believe as well, you have to spend 85%. So if you get under what's so-called truth in sentencing laws. So if you get a 20-year sentence in federal prison, you're serving at least 17 of it. There's no question about it. You are serving at least 17 before you can get paroled. In Texas, thankfully, that's not the case. And you can be paroled after serving 25% of it. Now, I served even less, but that's because they counted the time that I was out on bond appealing the case. They counted that as time served. So that meant I was eligible for parole basically as soon as I got incarcerated. And that's why I only had to spend 14 months. So I was really lucky and blessed in that case. But if I was arrested today and got a 7-year sentence, I would have to spend at least 3.5 years before being eligible for parole. And there's no point to that. There's no public safety benefit. It's only to be punitive and to brag about it for re-election. Like, why the Texas as I mentioned, possession of child pornography was the only non-3G sex offense. And they changed that in the 2023 legislature. Why? I don't know. Probably just because someone said, hey, we should get tougher on those people. And everybody's too afraid to speak up against it. So they're like, oh, yeah, sure. That sounds good. Yeah. I mean, what are they going to do? Stand up for people that are accused of possession of child pornography? Yeah, fat chance. So.
Yeah. Jeez. Hey, I just want to ask real quick. Is this like anything that you've seen?
Yes. That is similar to the.
Not that I.
Yeah. We had usually. Well, it would depend. I mean, they were usually orange ones when we were getting on the bus between different units, but they did look a lot like that, and so that was pretty similar to some of the footwear we had. So yeah.
About the football, another thing that I wanted to talk about. So what are your plans to change things, and what exactly are you trying to focus on?
Yeah, I want to work for a criminal justice reform organization for the rest of my life. So I think I mentioned it earlier, but I have a bachelor's and master's in accounting. So I'm an accountant by trade. But I've gotten so passionate about this criminal justice reform stuff ever since this happened to me. Before that, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. I was neither we need to punish more people or we need to punish less people. I was neither of those. I didn't really have an opinion on it. But ever since this has happened to me, I've gotten much more educated on it and read up a lot more, and found out through living through it and through other people's experiences that suffered even worse than I did, how terrible, the system is, and how judges can just ignore the law, how prosecutors are seeking convictions to try and get themselves reelected, how they ignore the law, in my case and in a bunch of other cases, convict people for things they weren't even guilty of. The fact that there's so many crimes in our criminal code that anybody can be convicted. Every single person or almost every single person in the US is a felon because there are so many crimes on the books that they've committed, whether it's drunken driving, drug use, underage drinking. Here's one I found out the other day. Did you know in Texas, if you own 6 or more dildos, you are a felon? So that is a felony in Texas. So if you own 6 or more, or any of those,
funny story. When I was a real estate agent, I went into a house and it had gotten burned, and I went into the master bedroom. All over the place. Definitely been considered fast because that house got on fire. They were everywhere. But no, I did not know that. I know Texas has a lot of silly laws still on the books. Like you can't, jaywalk after 8 p.m. or something, something silly like that. So you said you were going to be a part of a group that kind of works with that. So how have you gone about finding these groups or getting educated enough to where you can help this process?
Yeah, so there are groups that work on lobbying the Texas legislature and other people for changes. And that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like I said, I'm an accountant, but I'm so passionate about this now that I want to work at it full time and work at it, just make a career out of it and lobby for change. So
now you're out. So are you looking for
Yep.
that group? How do you get
I
involved with that?
I know a guy that used to work with the Texas Center for Equity and Justice, or Justice and Equity, actually, I believe his name. And now he works for Latino Justice. And so I am going to be working. So the light's not in my face anymore.
Sure.
So I'm going to talk with him and find out how I can get involved in these types of organizations and work for fighting for change, because I can speak about my own experience, because what happened to me was wrong, but other people, it's happened to millions of other people throughout the country. And, you know, the conditions in our prisons are terrible. The conditions in our jails are terrible. We're locking up way too many people for victimless crimes. Way too many people for so many crimes that shouldn't be there. And people don't realize it. I mean, people think everybody in there is a rapist and a murderer, and it's just not true. And they don't know all the injustices and abuses that prosecutors do throughout the whole process. I mean, the prosecutors, the judges, the police, in my case, they used illegal evidence, perjured testimony, ignored the evidence. You can name any number of things, and people don't know or care. So the media needs to start covering this stuff. And so I'm going to work on that and getting the media.
Is there anything, if somebody is interested in this, so you named one organization already, is there any other resources or anything that they should look up? Maybe if they have something similar happen to them or anything like that?
The Innocence Project is a great nationwide organization that works to fight overturn unjust convictions. Those are largely through DNA evidence that they work to overcome. Say, hey, like we need to why don't we test the DNA and see if this person actually did it? Because they're still claiming their innocence, and they're still sitting here with a life sentence in prison for some murder, convicted 20 years ago. And there's tons of great books out there. As well. The New Jim Crow is a great book that came out, I think, somewhat recently in the last decade or so about that type of stuff, as well as I'm reading a book called Copaganda currently that came out not too long ago. And so there's and lots of these organizations that exist to try and, reform criminal justice and reform the whole system and improve things. Like I mentioned, Latino Justice, and I know and I'm trying to find out more myself about more of these organizations so I can contact them and work for them. And hopefully I can overturn my conviction, because they ignored clear evidence in my case. So I'm going to try and still work to see if I can get some post-conviction relief here and try and overturn it. And if I can, that'll really help to fight for justice in the future, because people will take me more seriously if I'm not this convicted sex offender. So
right.
I hope to get to work on that.
If they do see this, do you want them to reach out to you? And if so, how can they reach out to you? Or maybe somebody that's going on, with
yes,
something.
I want to talk to anybody and everybody. The more people, the better. I've already reached out to. There's several people on Twitter. Clark Neely on Twitter is a great resource. He writes about the injustice in the system and how problematic it is that so many of our judges are former prosecutors, which guess what? They rule in favor of the prosecution. Hey, guess what? The judge in my case is a former prosecutor too. When you have a judiciary that's mostly former prosecutors, guess what? They act like prosecutors, and that's not good. That's terrible. So
if they wanted to reach out to you, how would they reach out to you?
Yeah, my email would be drunyon88@gmail.com, or my Twitter is drunyon88. And So D Runyon is DRUNYON, my first initial then last name. And so drunyon88@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from anybody and everybody that's suffered through stuff like this. I'm trying to talk to my fellow inmates, my people that have gotten out at the same time as me. I'm, trying to stay in contact with them and talk about all their injustices. Like I said, I might write a book about all this stuff because I could fill a book with all the stories. And I was only in there for 14 months. I was not in there for that long. And I could fill a book with all the terrible, crazy things that happened. And luckily, I did not get assaulted. I did not get raped. But, things are better than they used to be. But prisons used to be worse. There used to be more violence. It's still bad, but
and if you've got somebody in mind, maybe me and Tommy can have them on and we can interview them as well. Maybe they have a little more insight about what goes on in the prison, because I'm definitely interested, because it's a weird thing.
There was actually a guy in prison at the Amarillo unit, the barber that would shave the other inmates, give them, haircuts or shaves. He was trying to set up a podcast himself because he was wrongly convicted. And so he was trying to get a podcast to tell his story as well. So
maybe that would be something interesting. We'll see how the feedback is for this one. And it would be interesting. Well, awesome, David. Anything else that you want to close out on or hit on that you feel like is really important?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people think the legal system is what they learned from Law and Order, or it looks like Law and Order, and that's just not the case. I think Law and Order is probably the most harmful TV show in history because of how misguided it's gotten people to think about the legal system. I mean, we incarcerate so many people. It actually has been shown to be anti-public safety. It causes more crime by locking people up, not to mention the decrease in their quality of life. And it's doesn't serve any purpose, doesn't serve a deterrent effect, studies have shown. It does not deter future crime. And it's just a terrible thing. We should be more like these other rich countries in their system instead of, being so punitive and destroying so many lives. So I'm going to work to try and change that and fight things and let people know that, hey, there's a lot of innocent people that get convicted out there or coerced into pleading guilty, like in my case, where it's, hey, either sign 7 for 7 or you're risking 20. So take your pick,
Yeah. Geez.
So,
well, David, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I wish you nothing but the best. I think everybody deserves a chance, regardless of kind of how it goes down, or at least to be heard. And that's why we've had you on here today. I wanted, and obviously you wanted to really get your story out there. So hopefully this was a good platform for you to kind of get some of that stuff out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was great. I'm I want to tell my story to anybody who will listen. So I'm always glad to talk about it. And there's tons more I could say. I know there's time limitations, but shoot, I can go on for, like I said, I could fill a book with all this stuff. So
well, have you thought about starting your own channel?
I've thought about it. I'm not sure how.
I actually know a really good producer, and he does amazing work. Maybe I'll have to introduce you to him.
Is that guy on the call with us right now?
It's Tommy Cannon.
It's Tommy. Yeah, I figured.
Very talented man.
I figured. Yeah. Is this guy in the room with us currently? He's not in the room with us, but he's in the
Tommy,
chat.
He's
in the chat room.
I'm only jumping to save. I know, like, connection issues or something. That's why I was jumping off camera.
Of course. Yeah. So anybody else out there, if you're looking for an amazing producer, very talented, has got plenty of experience, reach out to Tommy Kenyon. He is an amazing guy and does amazing work. So David, think about that. Maybe think about doing your own podcast. I bet, like you said, you've made a lot of connections. So I'm sure you've got plenty of content, not only from yourself, but through those connections as well.
That's a great idea. And look into some of these other criminal justice podcasts too, as well, and get involved in that. Maybe even appear on some of those. I might look into that. I mean, I would love to do that type of thing.
You should reach out. I think that'd be a fantastic idea. Tommy, do you have any closing thoughts or any questions from what you've heard?
I pretty much covered. I think that closed out pretty nicely.
Yeah,
I know, like
fantastic.
it's a harder subject, and probably don't want to go too long on it.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yep.
It's a good introduction. And David, again, I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to be here and great to tell my story out here in a public forum for the first time.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're glad to hear it, man. Tommy, if you want to go and roll us out. This was Ziggy and Tommy and David, and this was a good open conversation. And kind of like our friends, we're looking for good vibes. So if you do leave a comment or anything, we'd really appreciate just leaving some positive comments or just questions. If you've got questions, then definitely go ahead and do that.